More on the top story now. The DA has lost its legal bid to reopen Garden Route beaches, but the Western Cape High Court has ruled to keep Cape Town's beaches open for a bit longer. For more on this, we're joined by the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen. Thank you very much, Mr. Steenhuisen, for your time here on ENCA. Your initial reaction to losing this battle to have the beaches open for much longer?
Well, we won the battle to keep the beaches open for much longer, and the High Court has agreed with us that the 9 to 6 p.m. time was irrational, and they've read in that it's got to be open from 6 a.m. till 7 p.m., so that's a relief. The part of the application that we lost was the application to have the Garden Route beaches opened. Obviously, we're disappointed with the outcome of that, and we believe that the judgment's going to have very far-reaching implications for the local economies in those towns, as well as business people and residents who are going to be very adversely affected by what is turning out to be mass cancellations, loss of revenue, and many of those businesses have been hanging on by their fingernails for most of the year. And we're really relying on a bumper holiday season to try and just see them through this year. Those hopes have now been dashed. I think it's unfortunate, but obviously we have to abide by what the court's ruling. But we are heartened by the fact that half the application was won, and we also got a costs order for half our costs, which shows that there was merit in aspects of the case before the court.
Now, the Garden Route, Mr. Steenhuisen, is one of our 3 hotspots in the country. And of course, at beaches, people don't necessarily go on the beach with masks on and don't social distance.
Well, of course, but there was absolutely no evidence led whatsoever in government's papers yesterday that beaches are areas where the virus is spread. In fact, the Medical Advisory Council was divided over the issue of beach closures, and it was very clear from the documentation which they were forced to provide in answering affidavits to our application. Many of them indicated that it would be better to have people outdoors rather than indoors, and that if you were to close the beaches, all you're going to do is to drive people into congested shopping centres and restaurants as they seek to obviously go around their festive season business. So there was no efficacy, we believe, and also we believe that the very high bar that the court set in the Batsa case, in the Western Cape High Court full bench decision, was not met by these regulations, as there was no evidence whatsoever that beaches are super spreader events, or that people would behave any less responsibly on a beach to how they would behave in a restaurant, a casino, a place of worship, a public transport, an aeroplane, an airport, or many of the other areas where people are permitted to be.
Your reaction then, Mr. Steenhuisen, to the Western Cape Premier Alan Windey's conversation with the media today about the Western Cape actually with their health facilities experiencing basically being overwhelmed by the number of COVID-19 cases that keep rising in that province?
Well, of course, and we're in the midst of a second wave, and yes, it may be in the Western Cape now, but as we've seen during the first wave, it's very soon going to be in the Eastern Cape, KwaZulu-Natal and Gauteng. I believe that Premier Windey, and certainly in the affidavits that he provided in court yesterday, indicated that there had been a slowing down and a plateauing of the transmissions in the Garden Route area, and that they felt that they would be able to manage whatever happened without having to close the beaches, particularly given the fact that there is no evidence whatsoever that beaches are events or places where the virus is more deeply spread. I think the big question we've got to be asking ourselves, however, though, is that we've been in the hardest and longest lockdown in the world, and why is our health capacity still under strain? We were told that we needed to go into this lockdown to prepare the healthcare response in South Africa. And here we are 9 months after that initial lockdown without being able to have any improvement in the healthcare response. And the only tool government has in its arsenal now is locking down, which has huge detrimental effects on the economy. And I think that the ill effects of this lockdown are going to be felt long after COVID-19 has passed here in South Africa.
Would it be correct then, Mr. Steenhuisen, to assume that the DA will not be heading back to court to try and appeal the decision, particularly with Garden Route beaches to be kept closed?
Well, obviously we'll wait for the written judgment, but here's the thing. If one looks at the number of days left, I mean, if we were to get an appeal and etc., government's indicated those beaches will remain closed to the 3rd of January. It's unlikely we'll get a court date again this year. And so I think the point becomes moot. But I'm very proud of the fact that we did our very best to try and do right by the people of the Garden Route, many of whom are going to face a very tough Christmas and a very tough decision about whether their businesses close, and if their business do close, whether they will reopen in the new year. I think that's what we were trying to avoid, and I'm very proud of the fact that the party went out and took a stand for those people who feel neglected, left, let down, and abandoned by government. And many of them are letting staff go, are essentially closing down their businesses because they will not be able to sustain themselves with this ban on beaches and the mass cancellations that are happening in many of these small towns on the Garden Route.
Well, we do have a new variant, Mr. Steenhuisen. So very shortly, what will the DA do if the president comes out after the 3rd and says he's extending the closure of beaches and the particular hours that it can still remain open?
Well, obviously, our options will remain open then. It is one of the points we made that, in fact, we've seen from March this year that these things just get extended month by month. And it's done by stealth. There's no reference to Parliament, which is one of the reasons we're challenging the Disaster Management Act in court, and we have no doubt that we will get to the Con Court on that matter, so that Parliament does get some say in it. Obviously, we'll reassess the situation. As I say, I would like to see the written judgment. What was handed down today was an oral judgment in the Western Cape High Court, and then that will determine the strategy on the way forward. Certainly, if there's going to be extension of that ban, it's going to have devastating impacts on the viability of even more businesses who, in the new year would be hoping that things would start to turn the corner. If there's further extensions of these beach bans and blanket bans, that extends particularly into the timeshare aspect of the January period, I think that there's going to be really a tough hammer blow to the economy in the Garden Route. And we've got to think, and I think the important point to remember here is that no one's denying there's a new outbreak, there's a second wave, and that we've got to do our bit to save lives. But we also have to save livelihoods. Poverty and unemployment are the biggest factors that drive deaths and suffering in South Africa. And if people lose the ability to be able to provide for themselves and their families, we end up with all sorts of longer-lasting problems such as malnutrition, hunger, starvation, and the like. And these, I think, will have far longer-lasting impacts. I really hope that government will see the light and certainly not attempt to extend that ban any more than they have already indicated.
All right, thank you very much. Unfortunately, we've run out of time. That's the DA's leader, John Steenhuisen.